I'm back in the garage trying to get bit by bit done before the start of the next drift season. While the engine is out of the car, it's an opportune time to address the sloppy steering rack and bushings that are currently there. We'll be going through the steps of removing the rack, pump, cooler, and all the hoses, then installing new solid subframe bushings from GKTech into the spare rack and placing it back in the vehicle. Let's get to it. If you don't plan on reusing any of these pieces or want it all to come off together with less mess, you don't need to remove the hoses from the reservoir, pump, or cooler. It can all come off as one piece. I will likely be reusing the cooler, so I'm disconnecting these hoses. Removing the cooler is as simple as squeezing the clamps, pulling them back, and then popping off the hose. Unless you're me, then you may need some pliers or screwdrivers to break loose the hose. Be sure to have a handy bucket or drain pan nearby to collect all the fluids. Here on the side there's a brace holding the hose to the chassis. Remove this bolt. Next I'll remove the bracket to the reservoir. 3 10mm bolts will set this free. This gives us a little room to access some of the hidden bolts below it. I continue by removing the 2 10mm bolts, connecting the ground strap to the chassis. It is still held in place by a plastic zip clip. Grab that cable and give it a yank. Sweep away the old tire debris to see one of the bolts that is still holding on some more bracketry. Remove this bolt, pull up the bracket. Just above the right-hand side of the crossmember is another brace holding the hoses. There should be 2 bolts here, so I just have a little less work to do than normal. Continuing down the lines, there is another 10mm bolt holding on a brace to the steering rack. Zip it out. We're to the end of the lines, and now to where they connect to the steering rack. The return line can be removed in typical fashion by pulling back the clamp and then pulling the hose from the barb fitting. Grab a wrench and spin off the hard line from the rack as well. The hose side of the steering system can now be removed. Set that bad boy aside or place it on Marketplace and be prepared for the lowest of lowballs. I then turn to removing the steering shaft from the rack. Remove the 10mm bolt on the upper collar. With this removed, I like to use a flathead to pry the collar open just a little, allowing the steering shaft to be removed when the rack gets lowered. I didn't record this portion, but you'll want to remove the tie rods from your steering rack. Otherwise you'll just look silly when you think it's time to pull the rack out and it doesn't. It also helps to remove the front control arm brace. With the brace removed, all bolts are easily accessed. Remove the 2 smaller bolts on the right hand side of the rack and pull off the brace. Then move to the bigger bolts on the left hand side. These big bolts have a lot of torque in them, so you may need a good impact or a breaker bar to assist. With the rack out, look at all this room for activities! After I have this out, I see I have some threads to repair on that right side bracket, so I'll prepare my tap and die set. It's now time to prep my replacement rack. I've finally invested in a hydraulic press, so these bushings don't stand a chance. You can burn them out or press them out, however works for you. You may want to remove the hard lines from the rack if you find that they're getting in the way when pressing the bushings in or out. I recommend taking this precaution. Now let's take a look at the new item of the day, the GKTech Solid Steering Rack Bushings. My OE bushings are trash, and I'm looking for more consistent steering with better feedback from my wheels. This should help do the trick. Here's the box. Inside, the pieces are wrapped like fine china. The first two items I'm showing are the front halves of the left side bushings. Note the little top hat on these fine, distinguished gentlemen.
Now kiss.
Here are the back sides of the left bushings, with the flat sides. And then the half circle bushings that will go on the right side. Well, I was going to record just pressing that piece in, but it just slipped right in. So let me see if the other one goes in so easily. And it turns out that when I went to press these in, 3 of the 4 bushings slid right in with little to no interference. After flipping the rack over and starting to put in the backside bushings, I do get to press one of them in. Again, if it doesn't go in smoothly, stop, make sure that you're aligned correctly and that there's nothing obstructing the path. We now head back to the car's front subframe. Make sure to clean up any debris that may be in the way of these new clean bushings. Don't be like me and forget to reattach the rack to the steering shaft. Otherwise, you'll be pulling the rack back out just to do it again. We can now take our rack with its new bushings and place it into the subframe, making sure to line up the locators that are on the left side bushings. Slide in the bolts and loosely thread them in.
I think my subframe is bent.
As I've said in other videos, this car has taken some hits in the past, and now I see that the subframe is slightly tweaked. You may be able to see that the right side of the rack wants to tilt slightly upwards. With enough leverage, I'm able to pull this right side down, get both halves of the bushing on with the back half of the brace. I then proceed to tighten and torque all the rack's bolts to the subframe. At this point, the rack is settled nicely in the vehicle. Reverse the previous steps to reattach anything you've taken off. This is also an opportune time to make sure that your steering rack is centered. If you're here because you're also doing an LS swap, in the future episodes I'll be going through the process of plumbing up the LS power steering to this rack. And there we have it. No more sloppy steering rack. If you liked this video and found it helpful, learned something, or have any other tips to share with myself or the community, be sure to hit the like button and leave a comment. Want to see more of the LS build and its process? Hit that subscribe button for notifications so you can follow along. This is Alex with Wallsdeep Drifting, signing out. Thanks for watching.